Okay, I think that participants are still rolling in. So just gonna wait another, I don't know, minute or so before we get started. Um, my cat was just fed, so if you hear munching in the background, that's him. So
I am so thrilled to be doing this from a hotel room because I have two cats at home in New York. And I swear to God, they are like so sweet, 90% of the time, quiet. But the second I log onto Zoom, they become like these like terrorists,
yeah.
and they have absolutely no regard for Zoom etiquette.
Liz, as it happens, we have a new campaign newsletter called The Run Up, and one of our features is we feature glamorous cats and dogs as a pick at the bottom. I can't make any promises because the competition is stark, but perhaps you'd like to enter a cat photo into this contest.
Yeah, I definitely would. Yeah, I mean, I feel like politics is like a lot of people in politics do have dogs and cats because it can be a sort of isolating business. But my cats are pretty competitive, so they're definitely going to want to be a part of that competition.
We should introduce ourselves to everyone.
Yes, we should. It seems like a good time to introduce ourselves. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Run Up Live. I am Grace Segers, one of the co-writers of the Run Up, the New Republic's campaign newsletter. I am here with Daniel Strauss, my co-writer, and we are extremely excited to be talking to Lis Smith today. She is a longtime Democratic strategist. She has a new book out called Any Given Tuesday. I just read the book. I read the whole book on Friday. Took me like 4 hours. It was a really fun read. So highly recommend it. She has been working with candidates with huge names like Claire McCaskill, Barack Obama's re-election campaign, very recently Pete Buttigieg's 2020 campaign. So we have a lot of questions for her. And if you have any questions dropped in the Q&A, we may be able to get to it. But Liz, just thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super excited as someone who has worked with both of you in the past, but always as a flack, talking to you about various candidates. This is exciting for the first time ever to be interviewed by you.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. And apologies for looking at my notes sometimes, but I do want to get started by asking about your relationship with journalists, with the media. In your book, you do have plenty of criticism for journalists and the media, although you also acknowledge the importance of relationships between communications professionals and journalists. And I was just wanting you to delve into that relationship a bit more, because you talk about the importance that journalists have in reporting the news, to an extent maintaining a healthy democracy, but what is the role of flacks and press people here, and what is that ideal relationship?
Yeah, well, I don't think that I am overly negative toward journalists in my book. I do pick out a few instances where I think unfair things were written or reported. But I also pick out examples of great journalism in my book. And I am someone who has tremendous respect for the journalism industry. And I think you guys can tell from working with me that I'm one of those flacks that actually likes working with reporters. There are a shocking number of people in my role who it seems like they hate working with reporters and they hate the media. And I have no idea then why they would choose this line of work. People who adopt a 100% combative approach toward the news media, and just see their day-to-day role as sort of stonewalling and stymieing them. And you all know the type of flax that I'm talking about. We don't need to name any names, but so, don't tell anyone, but I generally like the press. I like working with them. I think the work that you guys do is important. And I think that everyone is better off, you guys in the media, the candidates I work for, and most of all, the American people, if public officials, their flax, and the media can work constructively together. Of course, there are going to be disagreements, but no one wins when everyone's at loggerheads. So I think my goal with reporters always is to be a fierce advocate for my candidate, but to work with them. And that really came through on the Pete campaign when we ran easily the most media accessible campaign of the cycle, but did those on the record bus tours because we wanted to signal, it was important for me to sort of take my love of the media and innovate on it and do something that hadn't been done in a very long time. And, John McCain's Straight Talk Express happened before there was social media. So I wanted to sort of have some fun, innovate there. And it did show an element of fearlessness on Pete's part, but a respect for the news media that was frankly lacking, especially from our president, who was calling them the enemy of the people. And so we thought it was important from an informational standpoint, but also what it signaled, that Pete really was this sort of antidote to a Donald Trump.
And so as part of that, Liz, I mean, I've always found the Buttigieg sort of cadre or universe has been very eager to get Pete and other candidates on Fox News. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that? And also, you also talked about talking with the McCain folks. Do you tell them you should get your candidates on MSNBC more?
Well, so most of the McCain folks that I talked to were are sort of out of the business, so. I
mean, they're not right. They're not the center of the GOP anymore.
Yes. And they're people who are, the McCain campaign was that the people I talked to had worked on a presidential 20 years before me. So there's generally sort of an age limit on these campaigns for obvious reasons. You can't live like this forever. But as for Fox News, I think it's important to do for a few reasons. One, there's this myth out there that no Democrats watch Fox News. That's just not true. 33%, I think it's 31% of all Democrats get news from Fox News. And that's spread equally across racial groups. So it's a big audience, and it's got obviously a much, much, much bigger audience than the other cable news channels. For instance, when Pete did a Fox News town hall, we 1.1 million viewers tuned into it. That was about, I think, 4 or 5 times the number of viewers that tuned into CNN. So it's idiotic to me to turn down such a large audience. Now, this is the second thing that is really, really important. And I write about this in my book, in the Pete chapter, when I do have a big section in there about Fox News, is that what happens on Fox doesn't just stay on Fox. And when Pete did his first Fox town hall, he had a few moments that went mega viral from it. One where he took on Tucker and Laura. One where he spoke very eloquently about abortion and pushed back on right-wing talking points. And there's some other things like that. And the next day, I had our media monitor closely tracking it. It led our Fox News town hall, led cable segments every hour of the day on both CNN and MSNBC. And then it got picked up by People Magazine, TMZ, New York Times, Washington Post, maybe the New Republic, I don't know. And so it shows that, you can get, if you do a really good job on Fox, you can get a ton of secondary coverage out of it. And my view of media largely is the importance of secondary coverage, that in any interview you do, you want to make some news, you want to say something interesting, you want to say something different, not needlessly provocatively, because then if you do that, you know, it can spread and other news outlets will pick up on it. So I think Fox is important to do for those reasons. And I know that there are people who push back on it and they say, well, you're just legitimizing them for advertisers, all of that. Like, does anyone think that Fox was going to go bankrupt because Elizabeth Warren didn't go on there? Does anyone think Fox was going to go bankrupt because Pete Buttigieg doesn't go on there? All that happens is that then Fox News viewers will never hear directly from Democrats. They'll only hear the caricatures of Democrats from some of the more bad faith hosts there. And we miss out on an opportunity to talk to a big audience. And it is extremely, I think it is snobby. I think it's the height of disrespect to the millions of Fox viewers, many of whom are Democrats, to say, we're too good to go on your network. We're too good to talk to you. We're too good to meet you where you are. Because if we want to win people over, whether they're Democrats, whether independents, whether they're, you know, Republicans, we've got to go and meet them where we are. So that's why I'm an advocate of going on Fox. Obviously, there should be limits. It's got to be the right fit for the campaign. But I think I've covered everything there. I have a lot of thoughts on that one, if you can't tell.
Yeah.
I mean, just as a quick follow-up and to kick back to Grace, I'm so sorry about this. Which candidates would you advise to go on Fox this cycle? Like your old friend, would you advise your old friend Bill Hires to put John Fetterman on there right now? Or someone like, you know, Gretchen Whitmer? Who comes to mind?
Who comes to mind? So, well, obviously Pete. Yeah, I mean, every time Pete goes on Fox, I mean, it turns into just a mega viral event. So, and he's great because that also shows the value of secondary coverage, because what happens on Fox doesn't just stay there. Certainly, I would recommend it for candidates in red states or purple states. You know, Tim Ryan is a good friend of mine running for Senate in Ohio. He does Fox a lot. And I think it's really smart. And he runs ads on Fox of Fox hosts praising him, which is brilliant because you are not going to win a general election in Ohio these days without trying to reach across the aisle, try to get, you know, Trump voters and people who aren't, you know, diehard Democrats. So him. I would say Lucas Kuntz in Missouri. If he gets through the primary, Missouri is a very red state, which is crazy. I write about in my book about 2006 when I worked for Claire McCaskill and she was able to win. It was a very good year for Democrats, but Missouri not long ago was considered a swing state, and now it's to the right of Mississippi. So people who are running in red states, yeah, I think Fetterman should go on. I think Whitmer should go on. Pick the right shows though.
So is that means like no Tucker?
Yeah, I don't really think that there's much value in doing that unless you really want to be provocative and pick a fight and feel confident that you can win it. But I think Bret Baier is an honest broker. The America's Newsroom folks, Bill Hemmer. I advise a lot of Democrats to go on there. You know, recently, like Cincinnati Mayor Abtab Purebaugh was on there a couple of times. I've offered some help to Colin Allred over the years, and I know he goes on there occasionally. Anyone who is in a race in a district that is marginal, where you have a lot of red voters, where you've got to reach across the aisle, going on Fox is a smart decision.
So we obviously have a ton of political questions for you, and we will definitely be getting back to that. First of all, I want to apologize for my cat absolutely flipping out in the background. Sorry for all that to our viewers.
Liz is looking
I think he's
for the
currently
cat now.
hidden, but he's been running around.
Dude, now this entire interview, I hate to say this, guys, I'm just gonna be staring in the background for the cat. I see you tweet a lot about your cat. It's this beautiful little orange. It's an orange tabby, right? I
Yes,
mean, you knew what you were getting when you went to get an orange cat.
You're right. I did. But anyway,
Okay.
so if you see him running around, sorry about that. But I do also want to talk about some of the more personal elements of your book. You're very open about kind of the toll that it takes on your mental health, about being a woman in a male-dominated industry. So I want to start just by asking about that element of it. You've been in the game 20 years now. How do you think that being a woman in this industry has gotten better? Has it gotten better? And where there's still challenges?
Well, it's gotten better in that when you walk into a room, you see a lot more female faces. And when you walk into senior staff meetings, you see a lot more female faces. When you walk into leadership meetings, right, I'm going through all the tiers, right, you see more female faces. Usually it's one or two, but that's more than there was in the past. And yeah, I mean, it was hard for me sort of in the beginning of my career because I did not have any female mentors. In a lot of the campaigns that I was on, there were not women in leadership roles who could help sort of guide me, give me advice, tell me how to navigate this male dominated industry. Stephanie Cutter in 2012 on the Obama campaign was really my first, she was deputy campaign manager, had a big role overseeing all of the campaign's communications. And she was a really, really, really valuable mentor for me. And gave me straightforward, honest advice, was very supportive. And as a result, I've really made it sort of a mission in my career to hire great people, but really to scout out and recruit young women and continue to be in touch with them over the course of their career, to drop everything whenever they need advice. If their campaign's in a crisis and they need something, if they need job advice, if they need references, if they want me to eyeball something, it's really important because when right now, like the number one issue, obviously inflation's the number one issue, gas prices, all of that, but we are facing this massive, massive crisis with the Dobbs decision. And women across the country are in crisis. And so wouldn't it make a lot of sense to have not only more women candidates, but more women advising people behind the scenes? Because I'm not saying that men don't care about abortion and that men don't care about women's reproductive health choices, but women feel it more viscerally, and we can speak to it better, and we can advise candidates on how to talk about it in a way that I just don't think a male advisor can.
I promise to talk about politics more later, but this does remind me of a question that someone put in the Q&A. Stella Fair asked, popular idea now is that the reversal of Roe v. Wade is going to help Democrats in the midterms. What do you think of that idea? Is it too much to pin our hopes on that? Will it juice turnout? What's your take on it?
I think it will have a net positive effect for Democrats. Do I think it's going to save us? Do I think it's going to win us the House? I don't think it's enough to do that, but it is enough to move the numbers a bit. And that's why I think we've seen sort of a decoupling between Biden's numbers and the generic ballot numbers. And it has correlated largely with, obviously the horrific mass shootings, which for the first time in a long time didn't just drop out of the headlines in a day or two, and did really, really seem to penetrate with people. So I think that had an effect on that, but there's no question that Dobbs did. And where Dobbs can help is in helping get Democrats who might feel unmotivated by Joe Biden or Democrats who, just generally don't vote in midterms to maybe have a bigger sense of urgency and turnout. So that's important. And the other thing I think it will help with is, sort of those independent, moderate swing voters, the people who were, I think of as like the Biden Youngkin voters, who may have been inclined to vote for a Republican, for Congress, for Senate, for governor, for state house, whatever it is, in these upcoming elections because of their frustration with inflation or gas prices. But now, like with abortion on the ballot, that they can, they might not be able to hold their nose and do that, and that they might now hold their nose and vote for Democrats. So I think it will help Democrats in those two scenarios. From a campaign perspective, what I've heard anecdotally is that they have seen a rush of volunteers, especially women volunteers on campaigns, and a rush of donations, because people do understand that in politics, we use hyperbole a lot, and we say that every issue is a matter of life and death. This literally is a matter of life and death, especially if you read the clips. Every single day you read a horrific clip about a woman being denied essential health care because of new state rules that have been put in place. So I think it will be a net positive for Democrats, but probably not enough to overcome a Republican wave completely.
Well,
Daniel, go ahead.
Okay. Look, Liz, I wanted to touch on something a little bit earlier that you talked about, which is sort of reaching those cross voters or those Youngkin Biden voters. One thing I've been wondering about within the Democratic Party is it does feel, this is going to sound strange, but when the Dobbs decision first came out, Dave Portnoy, of all people, the Barstool guy, was like, this is crazy, this is nuts. And I've noticed some chatter on Pod Save America and in those groups wondering sort of the people who listen to him or those voters, they feel pretty disaffected by the entire system. Is there someone, Bernie went on Joe Rogan and to try and sort of reach that audience. Is there someone in particular you think, do you think Democrats need to try and reach out to that
Absolutely.
sect? And how do they do that?
So, I think, I don't know, I feel like I may have made history in having Pete be the first presidential candidate to go on Barstool Sports. I had him go on Barstool Sports a couple of times. I know some of the Barstool guys. I understand the criticisms of Barstool, absolutely. I'm not saying I endorse their language, endorse some of their behavior. Just as with Fox News, there are some people on there who I think act in better faith than others. And I personally am a big fan of Pardon My Take. I listen to it regularly. So yeah, I would put people on places like Barstool because that's an audience. It's not hyper political. It's early on. Fauci went on Pardon My Take to talk about why young people should take COVID seriously. And I thought that was a masterstroke from the people who were doing Fauci's comms. But yeah, I would absolutely try to put people on outlets like Barstool. I would try to put them on outlets like Joe Rogan, but also entertainment outlets. I do, again, my media strategy is admittedly different from your typical presidential campaign strategist. I don't look down on any news outlets. I'm not someone who is like, you can only talk to this New York Times columnist or Meet the Press because that's the presidential thing to do. And that's what's always been done. If that's your strategy, in the year 2020, so I'm sorry, but you're screwed and you should fire your communications advisors. Another outlet that I love that reaches a lot of people, across every demographic group, and a lot of disaffected folks who aren't necessarily regular voters is TMZ Live. I put Pete on there so many times during the campaign. He's gone on there as
I think they were the ones who asked him to do the Buttigieg dance, as a former Buttigieg campaign reporter. He did not do that, Liz.
Yeah, it was probably so. there were two things. So TMZ Live is their show that airs every day, and it airs in every market in the country. And it reaches an audience that is completely different from Fox News or MSNBC or whatever. And it gets, millions of eyeballs. And then TMZ, the site itself, gets millions of eyeballs. So there's a tape show that you do. I did it last week for my book. And I did actually notice a big surge in sales right after I did it, 2 hours after I did it. But then there's also where TMZ sends cameras to capture you. And a lot of candidates will sort of stiff arm them and their staff will, because it's like, ew, you don't want to talk to TMZ, a gossip outlet. I had a rule that was established early on with Pete that he never ever said no to a TMZ camera, because you could dine on a viral TMZ clip for days. And we had TMZ clips that would then be played on all the serious news shows, be picked up by the New York Times, be picked up by, maybe by the New Republic. You get the point. So yes, it is really important. A lot of one thing I have seen is that a lot of outlets like, in Nashville or in the music industry, they're very, very wary of having political guests on. So it makes it a little tough, but I think sports, entertainment, fashion, anything like that, where you're reaching a non-traditional audience is really, really important. And that was a really good question and something I hadn't thought of, but I'm going to bring that up with some people.
Grace.
1 second. Pumpkin's not allowed on the kitchen table. I'm just going to spray bottle him. Okay.
Oh my. All right.
We're good. We're good.
God, that is cat abuse. That is animal abuse. There are people who say that. Well, you can't train cats. At some point, you have to realize you just have to give in. They own you. You don't own them. Every part of your apartment belongs to them. And you just have to have a lot of Clorox around.
Listen, the kitchen table is the one place that we try to keep him off. Everywhere else we've accepted, but we have one place, it's the kitchen table.
Got it.
I do want to get back to talking about some of the personal element of the book. Something that I really liked and admired about this book was that you talked a lot about the physical and psychological toll of stress, whether due to your job or personal relationships. Mm-hmm. And there is this one part you said that you did a piss poor job of nailing the work-life balance while you were on the campaign trail, which I relate to. Right. So at the risk of asking a question that sounds like a can women have it all question, which I hate, but is it possible to have a life outside of a job as challenging as yours, and how do you balance it and not let it consume you?
It's possible, but it's not going to be necessarily like your normal life, right? It's not going to be like everyone else's life. And so you've got to, what's important to me is having a close-knit group of friends that understands, hey, I'm not going to respond to every one of their 300 texts on the group chain that day. But, when big things are happening in their life, good, bad, I will be the first person there for them, and that they will be the first people there for me. I think it's really important to have that. You're not going to be able to have 100 friends that you can talk on the phone with all day long. It's amazing when I do girls' trips with my friends who don't work in politics is how much time they have to talk on the phone with people who aren't for work, and it's like, oh my God, because as 90% of our days, it's, talking to reporters. For me, it's talking to reporters, talking to my candidate, talking to my staff. And by the end of that, I'm like, oh my God, I don't even have the energy to make another phone call, let alone the time. So there's that. And it's really hard in your personal relationships, meaning your dating relationships, because the guy I'm dating is, and whoever I'm dating at the time is usually going to have to get used to playing second fiddle to oftentimes the man that I'm working for. I do work for some women, but politics is a male dominated industry. And it has been hard I would say, for some of my boyfriends over the years to deal with that dynamic. So you've got to find someone who has their own life, and it is not expecting you to provide every source of fulfillment in their life. Someone who's very self-confident and does not care that you might be in bed at 2 a.m. talking on the phone with another man, and someone who's very patient. That's really important, but it's challenging. And I can tell you, I wrote about it in the book, but I did not write that I had the answer to it. And I still struggle with it. And frankly, most of the women I know do struggle with it as well. But if you ever get the answer, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I'll let you know. I'll shoot you a text.
Liz, one question I got from an operative ahead of this interview was, you have a small sort of plethora of mentees who come to you for advice, especially in the comms world right now. I'm curious what they ask, what you hear from them about candidates in the political landscape and what you ask them. I ask this just because it feels like some of the older hands and politicians, there's sort of a tension about wokeness. President Obama has warned against that. What is it? I'm wondering if that extends to the operative field. Are the next sort of wave of comms directors particularly, I don't know, interested in one thing or adversarial about one thing? How has that changed? And are you seeing more women or less go into the comms? Has that changed at all? I mean, everyone wants to manage in the end, or GC for general consult. Do you get a lot of questions on that? And what do you say?
Well, right. I get a lot of questions from people who are, 21, 22, 23. How do I become you? How do I do what you do? Which in part is why I wanted to write this book, because it's not like I woke up one day and suddenly I'm a senior advisor to Pete Buttigieg. Okay. I knocked on thousands and thousands and thousands of doors before I ever made a call to a reporter. I was an intern. I was a 21-year-old intern on John Edwards' campaign in 2004 and did mostly field work. I was a field organizer for Tom Daschle in 2004, field work. And so there is sometimes this attitude among new young staff that you're going to go from 0 to 60 and overnight become a star or highly paid or a top advisor on a campaign. And that's not how it works. You really, really have to grind and get a lot of experience to work your way up the ladder. To your question about the attitudes in campaigns, there were sort of a few questions in there, but I think I'm going to try to answer what I think.
Pick what you want, because I have a follow-up that.
And then tell me if I'm not right on it. Is that yes, there is tension on campaigns between sort of older, more traditional staffers and younger, I would say Gen Z, or on the younger end of the millennial end, which is that older staffers sort of understand that the mission of being on a campaign is electing a candidate, and that you don't agree with the candidate on 100% of issues. You understand that what's most important is the candidate winning, and that the Democratic candidate you're working for is a hell of a lot better than the Republican candidate you're working for, and that sometimes you will maybe disagree and have qualms with some of their positions. On campaigns now, I have noticed a trend, and I've heard this from other folks on these campaigns, is that with younger staff, they sort of see this as a way for them to promote their activism, their personal views, regardless of whether it's in line with what the candidate believes, and regardless of whether it's in line with with where the voters in the district are. And I understand that people have passionate feelings, and people should be activists for the causes they believe in. But a campaign where you're trying to elect one candidate, oftentimes under difficult circumstances, and we're facing a binary choice between Democrat and Republican, like, go to meetings on the weekends, go to marches on the weekends, and just understand what the main goal of a campaign is, which is to not bring your own politics into it, and realize that the politics of the candidate and the voters that you're trying to appeal to matter most.
Gotcha. Well, as a follow-up, the tie-in back to your book, I mean, you talk from the very beginning on sort of, it felt in your book that you talked a lot about looking for a candidate with that thing. To paraphrase Chris Matthews, you want that thrill.
Right.
As I've known you over the years, you've definitely sort of gravitated to the candidates who did have that. Sometimes they didn't always win.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that? I mean, there are definitely operatives who are very interested in one issue. I feel like David Axelrod will advise would-be candidates, what do you care about? If you don't care about something, you shouldn't be doing this. Why for you? Or could you talk a little bit about like the candidate and why that was important to you in sort of getting into this and where you went?
In terms of like how I choose candidates, or
just how it felt like you were always drawn to a candidate that did have a little bit of that star power. Not always, but you did like that.
Yeah, well, because I'm a communications person, and so you obviously want someone who does have some of that, because it helps. It helps with the communications, and you want someone who is a talented communicator, because you want something who can like go out and crush media hits. But for me, yes, there is an it factor to some of the candidates I picked, and some of them who are really, really good communicators. Pete being the best example of that. He is, unquestionably the Democrats' most talented TV communicator at the moment. And so let me just use him just so I can like zoom in on that to give you an example of what I gravitated toward. One is like, yes, like I knew when the second he opened his mouth, when I met him in person, I realized that he was a really, really different type of guy. He sounded different from the Democrats at the time, who are all very combative and thought that to beat Trump, you had to beat Trump. Pete was not like that. And he someone who rejects like sort of the hyperbole and a lot of the demonization that happens in politics. And I found that very, very refreshing. And I thought that it was something that would be able to cut through. Usually you think of like the loud, the most bombastic people, like the Chris Christies, as the people who cut through. But I just had a feeling hearing him talk that he would. And he just spoke very differently from everyone else. He framed issues very differently from everyone else, and he was very, very values focused. And Democrats sometimes are very bad at talking about our values. And his focus on values made me realize that he was someone who knew who he was, what he believed in, was very comfortable in his own skin, and that it would translate well with voters, because voters can like sort of suss out if a candidate is inauthentic. They can sort of suss out if a candidate doesn't really have strongly rooted beliefs, if they're just sort of repeating what their campaign advisors tell them. But so it was a few of those things are the things that really stuck out with me for Pete. But it was just the difference in how he talked. And like people during the campaign described him as sort of like Mr. Rogers or Chicken Soup for the Soul, or whatever those books were called. And that to me was the star quality, the throw up the leg, the it moment, because just the second he opened his mouth, I just never heard anyone talk like him in politics before.
Grace?
Yeah, I want to, I know we have limited time, only a few more minutes, but if possible, I'd like to ask one more question, maybe give Danielle another opportunity. But I did want to zero in on one particular state that you talk about in your book. You worked on Ted Strickland's campaign in Ohio. And in your chapter on that, you talk about Ohio as a swing state, but that was over a decade ago. So these days, do you think that Ohio could still be considered a swing state? Is it possible for Tim Ryan or any Democrat to win statewide now if their name isn't Sherrod Brown?
Right. So Sherrod, I would consider Ohio a red state right now, but it doesn't need to be a red state permanently. And Tim is running one of the best campaigns of any Democrat, I think, in the country. I think he's running the best Senate campaign of any Democrat in the country. And he's doing, because he understands a few things, which is that to win this election, you can't just do a base strategy and try to, in Ohio, you talk about the 3 C's, Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, and you try to run up the numbers there. What you've got to do is, yes, do that, appeal to those cities, spend a lot of time there, do a lot of media there, but go also everywhere else. And I get all his media advisories. Tim's a good friend of mine, a disclosure. I talk with his campaign team, so I'm extremely biased, but I see all his media advisories, and he's going to the reddest parts of the state. He's not just campaigning in blue areas. And why that's important is because, and I think Barack Obama talked about this after 2016, I believe after Hillary lost the campaign, and people asked him, well, why did he think that she lost and he won? And he talked about how it's really important to go to red counties, because if you go to a county that is 80% Republican, 20% Dem, and you do 2 visits there or whatever it is, and you can move it to 60-40, that makes a big difference. And think about if you combine all those red counties in Ohio together, and you can chip away at the margin, you're not going to win them. And we shouldn't think of this as only speaking the Democratic base, and the motivation only theory that some Democrats have is just a fantasy. But you really do have to cut in the margins in these places. And Tim is doing that, and is trying to do that. And I mentioned his Fox News strategy recently. It's smart of him to go on Fox, and it's very smart of him to run an ad on Fox, a Fox post praising him, because those are the voters that, if he's able to pull this off, will be the ones that help him pull it off.
Liz,
if I could, sorry.
No, Grace,
the quickest of follow-ups.
Okay.
You said Tim Ryan has the best Senate campaign you're seeing. Who else do you think is like really crushing it?
Well, I think Warnock is really great. Georgia that's going to be a tough state. It's not as tough as Ohio, but he's someone, he's one of those just really, really special candidates. You could tell when he first came, because he has a different background, amazing speaker, but is very refreshing, a very positive, fresh face in politics, and sort of the type of person that you want more of. His personal likability is just off the charts, and his campaign has done a good job of using that to their advantage to blunt some of the partisan attacks, because no one's going to, he's done a very good job of sort of playing up, being like a suburban dad. No one's going to buy that he's some, lefty, defund the police, socialist, radical, whatever you want to call it. And they've done a really good job of playing up some of his personal favorabilities to blunt some of the typical political attacks.
Liz, let's be honest here. It's not a question with Mayor Pete Secretary Pete of if he's ever going to run again. It's going to be when. I'm wondering what's going to be different next time he runs. You've written a lot in the book about that experience on the campaign. Obviously, we don't know what environment he will be in when he will run, who he will be running against in a primary. But what's going to be different? It is hard for me to not notice that occasionally Mayor Pete stops at a HBCU when he's touring, sort of to highlight the Biden administration's moves on infrastructure. And the Black community was a part where you guys did not start out in the greatest position with at the beginning of the 2020 primary.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't look at that and I understand your jobs is to always focus on the politics of things and sort of to take a cynical eye toward this. And I mean that not in a negative
way. Cynical?
No. I mean that not in a negative way, right? That, like, let's be honest, politics is filled with bullshit artists. I'm allowed to cuss here. If not, you can.
Sure.
Yeah.
We're filled with bullshit artists. You get a lot of people feed you a lot of bullshit spin and politicians who do that. So you are right to be cynical, to have a little bit of a jaundiced eye when it comes to this sort of stuff. But, when he's going to HBUs, when he's doing, events in the Black community as transportation secretary, it's because it is a massive focus of the infrastructure bill is to make sure that they're helping underserved communities. Because those are the communities that have been left behind in terms of infrastructure funding in the past. So that's a big,
okay, point taken.
The Biden administration has made that a big priority, and he represents the Biden administration, and that's a big focus of the infrastructure bill. Now, the other question you asked me is one that is, is problematic, is going to get me in trouble. So I'm going to try to answer it in a way that people can't do a pull quote.
Thank you.
Because Pete has said that he doesn't know if he'll run for office again. I know you say he definitely is, but you never know. And on the campaign trail, you probably remember him saying that, what he found in politics is that, like, if you plan too much ahead, if you play too much 4D chess, one, voters can sense it, and two, that's not the way to succeed. The way to succeed is to focus on what is immediately in front of you and do that as well as you can. Because, we all know those governors or whatever, or those Congress members, when they start maneuvering and it's completely transparent.
Mitt Romney wearing jeans and going to Costco.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That they're not interested in their day job anymore. And I think that hurts their credibility. So Peter said he doesn't know if he's going to run. He's focused on his job. And I am going to stick by that. Because I believe him when he says that. There is the question I think that I would ask, that the way that I would answer your question, though, is about a question I get from a lot of people and still get from a lot of people, which is America ready for a gay president? This was a question that we had with Barack Obama in 2008, and it was asked and answered. We had the question with Hillary Clinton in 2016, and it was asked and answered. Not ready for a female president. Maybe they just weren't ready for her as female president, but I do think that that's an open question, and I believe that America is ready for an openly gay president, but it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out right now, with Republicans now sort of edging toward throwing marriage equality to the states and questioning the Obergefell decision, and whether that backfires and it sort of increases tolerance and encourages maybe more people from conservative backgrounds or who work for Republican legislators or whatever it is to sort of come out of the woodwork, and for more people to be more open about, their lived experiences as LGBTQ Americans, or if this makes it, just more of a nasty political back and forth. It's a very open question because it's very new, but we've all seen in the last week, these Republicans, whether it's Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, whatever, sort of really starting to hone in on this issue. And I don't know what the political ramifications are there, but the open question for me is that I think people are going to be ready, but it will be very, very fascinating to see how that debate I just mentioned plays out, and if it has any impact on the midterms, because we all know that for a long time, a lot of Republicans the veneer of the Republican Party was the country club Republicans, right? And the Trump people were always there underneath. They're sort of like the people you know, the black sheep in your family. You don't talk about them, you don't invite them to the parties, but they're there. And with country club Republicans, you know, there are people who are sort of fine with voting Republican because they wanted low tax rates, but they didn't think that like abortion was really going to go anywhere. And they are, you know, socially liberal on marriage equality. So this is another issue that I think could turn them off of the GOP and help Democrats, because they care about their pocketbook. But when you're starting to do that, they also have LGBTQ family members. They might be LGBTQ themselves, and seeing that, right, maybe being talked about being ripped away could impact that. So that was a long answer because
no, I mean, look,
it's a really complicated issue. It's a really complicated one, and I think about it a lot, and I talk about it with people a lot.
One of the other best communicators within the Democratic Party, operatives besides you, said recently, Simone Sanders said, like, Republicans are gay too. This is not
right, exactly.
This is not a partisan thing. I guess I could keep going forever. Grace.
That is the problem, is that I could talk to you for literal hours, but we know you have another commitment that you have to get to. But we thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our viewers for joining us. Thank you for bearing with me while I had cat in construction in the background.
And you had the cat at some point walked right across the screen when Daniel was asking me a super serious question, and I just see your cat's tail. But yeah, no, it was.
I saw you trying to get out of that by looking at the cat, Liz.
No, I wasn't.
Can't escape.
I'm a cat person. What am I supposed to do? It's
you have,
like catnip for me.
It's catnip. Do you have a rescue you want to give a shout out for? We like to do that here at the Run Up. What's the phrase? Adopt, don't
shop. Cats of San Bernardino in California does God's work. Cats of San Bernardino. So they track their work on Instagram, TikTok. Okay. You can follow them there. I try to donate regularly to them, but there are also great local shelters in every community that you work in, that you live in. And I think it's really important to find the local ones that are doing a lot of the hard work versus giving to like the big national ones, because we've all seen the stories that not a lot of the money goes to actually rescuing cats, dogs, rabbits, ferrets, whatever it is.
Ferrets.
I saw a ferret on a leash in New York 2 weeks ago. So don't laugh
Park
at me.
Slope, where was it?
It was oh my God, it was at the Union Square Farmers
so that's
Market.
Downtown.
But it was at the Union Square's Farmers Market. So I feel like that was a ferret on a leash would maybe make sense at a farmer's market.
Right. Sure.
All right.
Thanks so much.
And on the note of ferrets, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you again, Liz. And we'll see you next time at the Run Up Live.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.